This lesson's on energy flow in ecosystems, and here are the objectives. Here's the food web from the previous lesson, and we saw that producers, like an oak tree, perform photosynthesis, and by performing photosynthesis, they take the light energy and transform it into chemical energy stored in the carbon compounds in the oak tree or in the acorn. Then when a squirrel eats this acorn, it takes in that energy, and now it can use that energy to build its own body and to perform work, to do the things it needs to in its own life. Similarly, when a fox or a hawk eat the squirrel, they then take in the energy in the squirrel's flesh and use it to perform work or to grow their own bodies. Now, not all of the energy gets transferred from one trophic level to the next. So let's think about how the squirrel gets energy from the acorn. First of all, the squirrel has to eat the acorn, and not all parts of the acorn are eaten. So some parts are not eaten at all, they're just left behind, and that's energy that's not transferred to the squirrel. Similarly, not all parts of the acorn are going to be digested. Some parts are going to be passed through the squirrel and out as feces, undigested matter. So leaving behind the parts of the acorn that aren't eaten and the parts that aren't digested and just pass out of the squirrel as feces, now we've got the rest of the acorn that is assimilated into the squirrel's body. And that can be used to do one of two things. It can be used to do work, or it can be used to build more of the squirrel's body, to increase biomass. And work can be thought of as being either work at a macro level, like movement, or at a micro level, like cell transport. So those are the kinds of things that are being done with that energy, and that is going to require cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is the process by which organisms unlock the energy that's stored in carbon compounds, and we'll look at that in more detail in later lessons. As well, because none of these processes is completely efficient, there are losses to heat at every stage, and so that heat energy is not available to be doing useful work. Now, the parts that are eaten and digested and not being used for work and not being lost as heat are available to build more biomass, to build more squirrel. And you can see, therefore, that there's only a fraction of the original acorn's energy that goes into the squirrel, and that energy is in the carbon compounds in the biomass. So by one estimate, only roughly 10% of the energy at one trophic level is passed on to the next, and this repeats at every level. So 10% of the energy stored in the acorn is now stored in the biomass of the squirrel. 10% of that in turn gets incorporated into the body of the fox or the hawk, etc., etc. And so we can use that to build a pyramid of energy. These bars represent the amount of energy at every level, at every trophic level. And so this down here is the primary producer, like the oak in our example. And then above that, we have the primary consumer, the squirrel. Above that, we have the secondary consumer. In our example, it's the fox or the hawk. And if there were tertiary or quaternary consumers, they'd be above that. So if there were 10,000 joules stored in the biomass of the primary producer, we would expect 1,000 joules in the primary consumer and only 100 joules in the secondary consumer. And the width of these bars is drawn to scale. Now, this 10% rule is an average, and it's going to depend on the organisms and the particular ecosystem, etc. But it's a good rough estimate. And what it helps us see is why food chains are limited in length, why we don't have consumer after consumer after consumer after consumer, because there's just not enough energy to support them anymore in the ecosystem, given this diminishing returns as energy is passed to every next trophic level. Also, you can see that energy is being used for things other than building biomass. It's being used in cellular respiration, or unlocked in cellular respiration, to do cellular work and work at the whole organism level. As well, it's being lost at every stage as heat. And so we need a continuous influx, in our example in the form of sunlight, a continuous influx of energy in order to power the ecosystem. So energy flows through ecosystems. As a result of its continual loss as heat, we need a continual input, in our example as sunlight. So that's a look at how energy flows in ecosystems and the reason why food chains are limited in length.